The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Sergeant William Hayes adjusted his red tunic for what he believed would be just another ordinary day. At 42 years old, William had served the royal family for nearly 2 decades, standing guard with unwavering dedication through countless ceremonies, state visits, and public appearances. His boots gleamed with military precision, his posture remained perfectly straight, and his expression stayed stoically neutral, just as he had been trained all those years ago. William had joined the Queen's Guard fresh out of military service, carrying with him the weight of family tradition. His father had served before him, and his grandfather before that. The Hayes family had protected the crown for 3 generations, and William wore that legacy like a badge of honor. He knew every protocol, every procedure, and every potential threat that might emerge from the crowds that gathered daily outside the palace gates. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, the palace buzzed with its usual activity. Staff members hurried through corridors, preparing for the day ahead, while security teams conducted their routine sweeps. William took his position at the main entrance, his rifle held at the perfect angle, his eyes scanning the growing crowd of tourists and royal watchers who had come hoping for a glimpse of the family they admired from afar. The weather was crisp and clear, typical for autumn in London. Leaves danced in the gentle breeze, and the sound of camera shutters filled the air as visitors captured memories of their royal encounter. William had witnessed thousands of such moments over the years, each one blending into the next in an endless cycle of duty and service. Prince George, now 11 years old, had recently begun accompanying his parents on more public engagements. The young prince showed remarkable composure for his age, walking with the confidence that came naturally to those born into royalty, yet maintaining a warmth that endeared him to everyone he met. William had observed the boy's growth from a distance, watching as he transformed from a shy toddler into a poised young man who seemed to understand the weight of his future responsibilities. As the morning progressed, William noticed unusual activity near the side entrance of the palace. Staff members were preparing for an unscheduled departure, and soon the familiar sight of the royal convoy began to assemble. 3 black vehicles, polished to perfection, waited in formation while security personnel made their final checks. William maintained his position but kept a watchful eye on the proceedings, knowing that any deviation from routine required extra vigilance. The side door opened, and Prince William emerged first, followed by Catherine and their children. Prince George walked beside his younger siblings, Charlotte and Louis, his hand gently resting on Louis's shoulder in a protective gesture that spoke volumes about his character. The family moved with practiced ease toward their vehicle, acknowledging the staff with warm smiles and brief words of thanks. William Hayes had seen this routine countless times, but something felt different today. There was an energy in the air, a sense of anticipation that he couldn't quite identify. The royal protection officers seemed more alert than usual, their communication devices crackling with increased chatter. Even the palace staff appeared to move with greater urgency, though everything still maintained the polished efficiency that defined royal operations. As the convoy prepared to depart, Prince George suddenly stopped walking. He turned toward the main gate where William stood at attention, and for a brief moment, their eyes met across the courtyard. The young prince raised his hand in a small wave, a gesture so natural and genuine that it seemed to transcend the formal boundaries that typically separated the royal family from their protectors. William, bound by protocol, could not respond to the gesture while on duty. He maintained his rigid posture, his expression unchanged, but something stirred within him. In that brief exchange, he saw not the future king, but simply a young boy acknowledging the men and women who dedicated their lives to keeping his family safe. The convoy departed, leaving the palace grounds quieter than before. William continued his duty, but his mind wandered to that moment of connection. Throughout his years of service, he had maintained professional distance, understanding that his role was to protect, not to form personal attachments. Yet something about Prince George's simple acknowledgement had touched a part of him that he had kept carefully guarded. As the day wore on, tourists continued to gather at the gates, many of them families with children of their own. William watched as parents lifted their little ones for better views, their faces bright with excitement at the possibility of seeing a member of the royal family. The children pressed their faces against the iron bars, their eyes wide with wonder and curiosity about the world beyond the gates. During his lunch break, William sat alone in the staff quarters, reflecting on his morning encounter. His colleague, Sergeant Thompson, joined him at the table, noting the unusually contemplative expression on William's face. "Everything all right, Hayes?" Thompson asked, settling into his chair with a steaming cup of tea. William considered the question carefully. "Just thinking about the job, about what we do here," he replied, stirring his coffee absently. Thompson nodded knowingly. 20 years of service can make a man philosophical. "I've seen it happen to the best of us." "It's not that," William said, though he struggled to articulate exactly what was troubling him. "It's about connection, about seeing the people we protect as more than just assignments." Their conversation was interrupted by the return of the royal convoy. Through the window, William could see the family disembarking, the children chattering excitedly about their morning outing. Prince George walked with the same measured steps as before, but there was something different in his demeanor, a thoughtfulness that seemed beyond his years. As William returned to his afternoon post, he found himself studying the faces in the crowd with new interest. A young mother held her toddler, both of them waving hopefully at the palace windows. An elderly gentleman stood quietly, his military medals catching the sunlight, clearly a veteran paying his respects. Teenagers snapped selfies, their laughter infectious and carefree. The afternoon brought its usual stream of official business. Dignitaries arrived for scheduled meetings, their limousines sweeping through the gates with practiced efficiency. William maintained his vigilant watch, but his thoughts kept returning to that morning's brief moment of human connection. He began to wonder about the boy behind the title, about the pressures and expectations that would shape Prince George's future. As evening approached and the crowds began to thin, William prepared for the end of his shift. The changing of the guard proceeded with its traditional precision, a ceremony that never failed to draw appreciative applause from the remaining visitors. William's replacement took his position with the same dedication and professionalism that defined their unit. Walking home through the London streets, William found himself observing families in a new light. Children played in parks while their parents watched protectively, the simple bonds of family love playing out in countless small moments. He thought about his own family, about his wife Sarah and their teenage daughter Emma, about the time his duty had taken him away from their own precious moments. That evening at dinner, Sarah noticed her husband's unusual quietness. "Long day at the palace?" she asked, passing him the serving dish. "Different day," William replied, still processing his thoughts. "Sometimes you see things that make you question everything you thought you knew about your purpose." Emma looked up from her phone, intrigued by her father's philosophical mood. "What kind of things, Dad?" William smiled at his daughter, seeing in her the same bright curiosity he had witnessed in the young prince's eyes. "Sometimes it's the smallest gestures that carry the biggest meaning," he said. "A simple wave can change everything." As the family continued their meal, William found himself thinking about the delicate balance between duty and humanity, between protecting and connecting. Little did he know that the events of the following day would test everything he believed about his role and force him to make a decision that would change his life forever. The next morning arrived with an unexpected chill in the air, and heavy clouds threatened rain over London. William arrived at Buckingham Palace earlier than usual, his mind still processing the events of the previous day. As he went through his morning preparations, checking his uniform and equipment with the same meticulous care he had practiced for 20 years, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. The palace staff seemed unusually busy, with increased activity in the corridors and more security briefings than normal. William learned during the morning briefing that Prince George would be visiting a local children's hospital that afternoon, part of his gradual introduction to royal duties and charitable work. The visit had been planned for months, but recent security concerns had required additional protective measures. As William took his position at the main gate, he noticed several things that were different from the usual routine. The crowd outside was larger than typical for a Wednesday morning, with many people holding homemade signs and flowers. Word had somehow spread about the prince's upcoming hospital visit, and well-wishers had gathered hoping to catch a glimpse of the young royal before his departure. Among the crowd, William spotted a young girl, perhaps 8 years old, standing with her grandmother near the front of the barriers. The child held a small bouquet of hand-picked flowers, clearly chosen with care from someone's garden. Her grandmother kept a protective arm around her shoulders while explaining something in hushed, excited tones. The girl's eyes never left the palace doors, her face bright with anticipation and hope. Further back in the crowd, William noticed a man in a wheelchair, wearing a hospital gown underneath a heavy coat. Despite his obvious frailness, he had made the effort to come to the palace, supported by what appeared to be family members. The sight struck William deeply, reminding him of the profound impact that even brief royal encounters could have on people's lives. As the morning progressed, more families arrived, many of them clearly from the surrounding hospital district. William began to piece together the significance of Prince George's upcoming visit. St. Mary's Children's Hospital, just a few miles away, was renowned for its treatment of seriously ill children. Many of these families likely had children receiving care there, and they saw the prince's visit as a beacon of hope and recognition for their struggles. Shortly after noon, the familiar preparations for departure began. The royal convoy assembled with its usual precision, but William noticed additional security vehicles, indicating the heightened importance of this particular engagement. As the family prepared to leave, Prince George appeared at the side entrance, dressed in a smart navy suit that made him look remarkably grown up for his 11 years. What happened next would stay with William Hayes for the rest of his life. As the family walked toward their vehicles, Prince George suddenly stopped and looked toward the main gate. He had clearly noticed the crowd of children and families waiting there, their faces pressed against the barriers, their signs and flowers held high in hopeful display. Instead of continuing to his assigned vehicle, Prince George turned to his father and spoke quietly. William was too far away to hear the words, but he could see Prince William considering his son's request carefully. After a brief consultation with the security team, a decision was made that broke with standard protocol. Prince George, accompanied by his protection officer, walked directly toward the main gate where the crowd had gathered. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Children began calling his name, flowers were thrust forward, and the excitement in the air became almost tangible. But instead of simply acknowledging the crowd and moving on, Prince George did something extraordinary. He approached the young girl with the homemade bouquet, the one William had noticed earlier. Getting down to her eye level, he accepted her flowers with genuine warmth and spent several minutes talking with her and her grandmother. William could see tears in the elderly woman's eyes as she explained something to the prince, likely about her granddaughter's own connection to the hospital he was about to visit. From there, Prince George moved along the barrier, spending time with each family, asking questions, and listening to their stories with the kind of attention that seemed far beyond his years. When he reached the man in the wheelchair, he knelt beside him and engaged in what appeared to be a serious, heartfelt conversation. The man's family members were visibly moved, some wiping away tears as they witnessed their loved one receive such personal attention from the future king. William watched all of this unfold from his post, bound by duty to maintain his position, but deeply affected by what he was witnessing. This wasn't a planned photo opportunity or a scheduled meet and greet. This was a young boy recognizing the humanity in the people who had come to support him and choosing to respond with kindness and genuine care. The security team, while maintaining their protective stance, allowed the interaction to continue far longer than any protocol would typically permit. Even they seemed to recognize that they were witnessing something special, a moment that transcended the usual boundaries of royal engagement. When Prince George finally made his way back to the convoy, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. But the prince turned back one more time, waving to everyone and calling out words of thanks. His face showed no sign of the burden or obligation that such interactions might represent to others in his position. Instead, he appeared energized and genuinely happy to have made these connections. As the convoy departed for the hospital, William remained at his post, but his mind was racing. He had just witnessed leadership in its purest form, a young person choosing compassion over convenience, connection over protocol. The contrast between the prince's natural instinct to reach out and his own rigid adherence to professional distance began to weigh heavily on his thoughts. The crowd slowly dispersed, but many lingered, still glowing from their encounter. William overheard conversations filled with wonder and gratitude. The young girl with the flowers kept looking at her hands where the prince had touched them, as if she could somehow preserve the magic of that moment. Her grandmother was already on the phone, sharing the incredible experience with someone who couldn't be there. The man in the wheelchair was surrounded by his family, all of them talking excitedly about the prince's words and the time he had taken to listen. William could see that this brief interaction had given them something precious, a memory that would sustain them through whatever challenges they were facing. Throughout the afternoon, as William continued his duties, he found himself questioning the walls he had built around his role. For 20 years, he had believed that professional distance was essential, that emotional detachment was necessary for effective protection. But Prince George's actions challenged that belief, suggesting that strength could come from connection rather than separation. When William's shift ended that evening, he didn't head straight home as usual. Instead, he took a detour through the nearby park where many local families spent their evenings. He watched children playing while their parents supervised, observed teenagers gathering in groups, and noticed elderly couples walking hand in hand along the pathways. For the first time in years, William saw these people not as potential security concerns, but as individuals with their own stories, dreams, and struggles. He began to understand that his role as protector didn't have to mean isolation from the very humanity he was sworn to defend. That night at dinner, Sarah immediately noticed the change in her husband's demeanor. "You look different tonight," she observed. "Something happened today." William nodded slowly. "I witnessed something that I think will change how I see everything," he said. "Prince George showed me that being strong doesn't mean being distant, that caring for people means truly seeing them, not just watching over them." Emma put down her fork, interested in her father's unusual openness. "What did he do?" "He chose to connect when he could have stayed separate," William replied. "He saw people who needed recognition and chose to give it, even when it wasn't required or expected." As William lay in bed that night, he found himself thinking about his own relationship with his family, his community, and his sense of purpose. Prince George's simple act of kindness had illuminated something that had been missing from his own life, a recognition that true service came not just from duty, but from genuine care for others. He had no way of knowing that the events of the following day would put these new realizations to the ultimate test, forcing him to choose between the protocol he had followed for decades and the human connection he was just beginning to understand. Friday morning brought news that would test everything William Hayes had learned about himself over the past few days. As he arrived at Buckingham Palace for what he assumed would be another routine shift, he was informed that there had been a security incident during the night. Nothing serious, but significant enough to require a full review of all protocols and procedures. The incident had occurred at St. Mary's Children's Hospital, the same facility Prince George had visited just 2 days earlier. A man had attempted to gain unauthorized access to the ward where the prince had spent time with young patients. Security had apprehended him quickly, and investigation revealed that he was simply an over-enthusiastic royal fan who wanted to see where the prince had been. No harm was intended, but the breach highlighted potential vulnerabilities in the security arrangements. William found himself assigned to a special review committee tasked with analyzing the incident and recommending changes to future protocols. As he sat in the briefing room, listening to detailed accounts of what had transpired, he couldn't help but think about the families he had seen at the palace gates, about their genuine love and admiration for the royal family, and about how easily good intentions could be misinterpreted as threats. The head of security, Commander Richards, outlined the proposed new measures. They were comprehensive and would effectively eliminate the kind of spontaneous interaction that Prince George had initiated with the crowd outside the palace. Future public engagements would require larger security perimeters, more advanced screening of crowds, and strict adherence to predetermined routes and schedules. The safety of the royal family must be our primary concern, Commander Richards explained to the assembled team. While we understand the importance of public engagement, we cannot allow security to be compromised by unscheduled interactions, regardless of how well-intentioned they may appear. William listened to the briefing with growing unease. He understood the logic behind the new protocols, recognized the legitimate security concerns they addressed. But he also remembered the joy on Prince George's face as he connected with the families at the gate, the tears of gratitude in an elderly grandmother's eyes, and the hope he had brought to a man facing serious illness. As the meeting progressed, William found himself thinking about his own daughter, Emma. Just 16 years old, she had recently begun expressing interest in volunteer work, particularly with younger children. She often talked about wanting to make a difference in people's lives, to use her privileged position as the daughter of a palace guard to help others. William realized that his daughter already understood something that had taken him 20 years to recognize, that true service came from connection, not distance. During the lunch break, William encountered Prince George in one of the palace corridors. The young prince was walking with his tutor, discussing what appeared to be a history lesson about British monarchs and their relationships with the people they served. When Prince George noticed William, he paused and offered a respectful nod. "Sergeant Hayes," the prince said politely, "I wanted to thank you and all the guards for keeping us safe during our hospital visit. It meant a lot to be able to meet those families." William felt a surge of emotion at the prince's words. Here was the future king, taking time to acknowledge and thank the security team, showing the same consideration for them that he had shown for the families at the hospital. It was another example of the authentic leadership that seemed to come so naturally to the young royal. "It was an honor to serve, Your Royal Highness," William replied, maintaining proper protocol while feeling a deeper appreciation for the boy he was protecting. Prince George smiled. "I hope we can continue to find ways to meet people like that. I learned so much from talking with those families, especially from the gentleman in the wheelchair. He told me about his grandson who's receiving treatment at the hospital. It reminded me that being royal isn't just about ceremonies and duties. It's about caring for people." As the prince continued on his way, William stood in the corridor, struck by the wisdom in those words. An 11-year-old boy understood something about leadership that many adults struggled to grasp. That true authority came from service to others, not from power over them. The afternoon session of the security review focused on implementation of the new protocols. William found himself increasingly uncomfortable as the discussion progressed. The proposed changes would effectively create an impermeable barrier between the royal family and the public, making spontaneous interactions like the one he had witnessed virtually impossible. When Commander Richards asked for feedback from the team, William surprised himself by speaking up. "Sir, I have concerns about completely eliminating unscheduled public interactions," he said, his voice steady despite his nervousness. The room fell silent. William had served quietly and without controversy for 2 decades, and his colleagues were surprised to hear him challenge policy decisions. "What concerns, Sergeant Hayes?" Commander Richards asked, his tone neutral but attentive. William took a deep breath. "I believe there's value in allowing the royal family to connect with people in authentic ways. What I witnessed at the palace gates this week wasn't a security failure. It was effective leadership. Prince George's willingness to engage with those families created more goodwill and positive security atmosphere than any protocol we could implement." Another team member, Sergeant Collins, nodded in agreement. "Hayes has a point. The crowd was more cooperative and peaceful after the prince's interaction than I've ever seen before." Commander Richards considered their input carefully. "While I appreciate your perspective, gentlemen, we cannot base security decisions on emotional responses. Our responsibility is to protect the royal family, not to facilitate public relations opportunities." "But what if those aren't separate goals?" William asked, his confidence growing. "What if genuine connection with the public is actually part of protecting them?" Prince George showed remarkable judgment in his interactions. He demonstrated that he understands both his responsibilities and his relationship with the people he will someday serve. The discussion continued for another hour, but William could see that the decision had already been made. The new protocols would be implemented regardless of any concerns about their impact on public engagement. As the meeting concluded, William felt a profound sense of disconnect between his evolving understanding of service and the rigid structure he had served for so long. That evening, William sat in his garden at home, watching Emma help their elderly neighbor with her groceries. His daughter moved easily between houses on their street, checking on residents, offering assistance, and building the kind of community connections that made everyone safer and happier. She embodied the same instinct for service that he had witnessed in Prince George, the understanding that caring for others was both a privilege and a responsibility. Sarah joined him on the garden bench, noting his contemplative mood. "The security review didn't go well?" she asked. "It went exactly as expected," William replied, "but I'm not sure I can continue to be part of a system that values protection over connection, that sees the public as a threat rather than the very people we're supposed to serve." "You're thinking about leaving," Sarah said, not really asking a question. William nodded slowly. 20 years ago, I thought I understood what it meant to serve the crown. I believed that duty meant standing apart, maintaining distance, following orders without question. But this week, I learned from an 11-year-old boy that real service means seeing people, connecting with them, understanding that protection comes from relationship, not just from barriers. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching Emma continue her evening rounds of the neighborhood. Finally, Sarah spoke. "Your father and grandfather served with honor, but they served in different times, under different circumstances. Maybe it's time for a Hayes to serve in a different way." The next Monday morning, William Hayes walked into Commander Richards' office and submitted his resignation from the Queen's Guard. His letter was simple and respectful, thanking his superiors for 20 years of meaningful service, while explaining that he felt called to pursue a different form of community protection and service. The news of his resignation spread quickly through the palace. Many of his colleagues expressed surprise and disappointment, but others understood his decision. Sergeant Thompson, his longtime friend, found him clearing out his locker on his final day. "You're really doing this?" Thompson said, shaking his head in amazement. I have to, William replied. I can't continue to serve a system that I no longer believe in. Prince George showed me what real leadership looks like, and I want to find a way to serve that vision rather than the protocols that would prevent it. Within a month, William had joined the security team at St. Mary's Children's Hospital, the same facility Prince George had visited. His role involved not just protecting patients and staff, but creating an environment where families felt safe and supported during the most challenging times of their lives. It was security work, but it was also community building, relationship formation, and genuine service. 6 months later, William received an unexpected visit at the hospital. Prince George, now 12 and continuing his gradual introduction to royal duties, had returned for a follow-up visit with some of the young patients he had met during his first trip. When he saw William in his new role, the prince's face lit up with recognition and approval. "Sergeant Hayes," the prince said warmly, "I'm glad to see you here. This is exactly where someone with your understanding of service belongs." William smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction in his decision. "Thank you, Your Royal Highness. You taught me that protecting people means more than standing guard. It means being part of the community you serve." As William watched Prince George interact with the hospital patients and their families, he saw the same natural compassion and authentic connection that had inspired his life change. The young prince moved through the ward not as a distant figure visiting from above, but as a caring friend bringing hope and joy to children facing serious challenges. Years later, when Prince George would face his own decisions about how to balance royal duty with human connection, he would remember the security guard who chose to leave the palace in order to better serve the people he was meant to protect. And William Hayes would continue to find meaning in his work at the hospital, knowing that sometimes the most courageous act is not standing at your post, but choosing to serve in the way your conscience tells you is right. The story of Prince George's quiet yet impactful move had consequences far beyond that single moment at the palace gates. It reminded everyone who witnessed it that true leadership comes from the heart, that authentic service requires genuine connection, and that sometimes the smallest gestures of kindness can change lives in the most profound ways. For William Hayes, it became the catalyst for finding his true calling, proving that inspiration can come from the most unexpected sources and that it's never too late to choose a path that aligns with your deepest values.